I love Savage Worlds, but I've always felt hindrances could be more active, more compelling. So I did what any good GM does when they can't leave well enough alone. I tried to build a better mousetrap. This is my Compel engine. On paper, it's designed to make hindrances a constant dynamic part of the game, consistently rewarding players for role-playing their flaws. In reality, it's probably a completely unbalanced, exploitable mess, and I need your help to prove it. Today, I'm going to walk you through how it works, what problems I already see, and then I want you to tell me exactly how you'd break it. So what's the problem we're trying to solve? Hindrances are a core part of character creation in Savage Worlds. We take on these flaws: arrogant, loyal, one-eye, vengeful, to get more points to build the hero we want. But what happens after character creation? The core rules encourage GMs to hand out bennies when players roleplay their hindrances, but this leans entirely on GM discretion, which leads to a few common frustrations. First, the rewards are wildly inconsistent. Some GMs are amazing at this and might aim for 1 benny per hindrance per session. Others get so caught up on the game that they rarely award any at all. That one's me. I'm not very good at it. This problem is especially true in one-shots or with new groups, where the GM just plain forgets who has what. Second, there's a big imbalance between different kinds of hindrances. If your character has a physical flaw like lame or one eye, you are constantly paying the price with a mechanical penalty, but you almost never get a benny for it unless a GM makes a point to notice. Meanwhile, someone with a social hindrance like arrogant or curious only has that flaw come up when they choose to roleplay it for a reward. It creates this weird gap where some flaws are a constant tax and others are an occasional benny farm. This leads to a third and more subtle problem: the benny hoard. Because bennies can feel scarce and are vital for soaking wounds, players often hoard them for that one perfect, desperate moment. It's a smart play, but it can slow down the game and lead to less dynamic, less savage moments. Players are way less likely to spend a benny on a cool reroll if they're terrified of needing it to survive a dragon's attack later on. The goal is simple: create a system that makes hindrances pay out consistently, closes the gap between physical and social flaws, and encourages a faster, more fluid benny economy, all without piling more work onto the GM. To do that, I look to another system for inspiration: Fate Core. My solution is a totally untested homebrew I'm calling the Compel engine. It's a direct adaptation of the Compel mechanic from Fate Core, which is brilliant at making character aspects, their version of hindrances, sort of, drive the story. And I want to be crystal clear: all credit for this concept does go to Fate. I'm just trying to bolt it onto the Savage Worlds chassis and have to make some additional changes to make it work. The engine has 4 parts, plus one important safeguard. Let's start with the part that players control: the self-compel. Here, a player can actively choose to make their own life more complicated. At any time, a player can say, "I'm performing a self-compel." They then narrate a bad choice that's directly driven by one of their mental or social hindrances. The arrogant hero can't stop himself from insulting the city guard captain. The curious investigator has to open the obviously trapped chest. The key is this can't just be flavor. It has to create a real complication, whether it be part of the story or mechanical in some nature. The player has to accept a tangible penalty approved by the GM. Maybe they become distracted or vulnerable, or maybe they automatically fail a social check, or give an enemy a tactical advantage. If the GM agrees the complication is real and stems from the hindrance, the player immediately gets a benny. It's a direct mirror of Fate's system. The player gets agency, the story gets a fun twist, and the benny economy starts flowing. The GM's only job is to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on whether the complication is real. Of course, we can't let the players have all the fun. The second part of the engine is the GM Compel. This is when the GM sees a perfect moment for a character's flaw to make things spicier. Let's say the party is trying to sneak past a sleeping dragon. The GM turns to the player with the greedy hindrance and says, "As you're about to slip past, you spot a single, flawless gold coin right under the dragon's nose. I'm compelling your greedy hindrance. You feel an overwhelming urge to try and snatch it." By doing this, the GM is giving the player a benny. It would be theirs, but the player does have a choice. They can accept the complication, go for the coin and deal with the consequences, take the Benny, or they can immediately spend a Benny from their own stash to buy off the Compel. If they buy it off, they get to narrate how their character resists the urge. I see the coin, my hand twitches, but then I see a puff of smoke from the dragon's nostrils, and I think better of it. It gives the GM a tool to use hindrances to create drama, but it keeps player agency front and center. It's not the GM saying, you do this. It's the GM saying, your flaw is pulling you this way. Resisting it will cost you. And critically, the GM no longer has to worry if they're being fair, because the system literally pays the player for their trouble. This is all great for role-playing hindrances, social and mental ones. But what about the physical ones, the one arm or bad eyes? These hindrances hand out penalties, but rarely seem to pay out. This is where the third part of the engine clicks in, the passive trigger. When a physical hindrances penalty is the direct cause of a failed roll, the player automatically gets 1 Benny. No narration needed, though highly encouraged. For example, a character with the one eye gets a -2 on range attacks over a certain distance. Let's say they take a shot and their final dice total is a 3. Well, without that penalty, they would have had a 5, which is a success. Because the penalty was the specific reason they failed, a Benny just flows to the player. The system itself acknowledges the cost and pays you for it. This finally closes that massive gap between a hindrance that's a constant mechanical drag and one that's a narrative choice. It makes taking a physical flaw feel less like a tax and more like a balanced trade-off. Of course, physical hindrances can still be part of player or GM compels too. A GM or player might compel a character with the lame hindrance by saying the crumbling staircase they need to climb looks especially treacherous for them. Right now, the tabletop role-playing game veterans watching are probably screaming at their screens why players would self-compel every 5 seconds and build an infinite Benny machine. And you are absolutely right. That's why the engine needs a regulator. The fourth piece to this engine is the session budget. Each character has a compel budget that limits how many bennies they can earn from this engine per session. A simple formula could be 1 per hour of play rounded up. So for a 4-hour session, each player has a compel budget of 4. Every time you get a Benny from a self-compel, a GM compel, or a passive trigger, you tick off one of your boxes of your budget. Once your budget is spent, your hindrances are still part of the story, but they stop paying out bennies through this engine. This stops the spam while still allowing for the flurry of activity. Maybe all 4 of your compels happen in the first hour. That's fine. But for the rest of the night, your flaws are just for the story. And to be clear, this system runs completely separate from the GM's normal ability to award bennies. The GM can still and should still toss out bennies for a brilliant idea or a great one-liner. This engine isn't meant to replace GM discretion. It's meant to provide a reliable baseline for hindrance play, freeing the GM up to be more spontaneous with their own rewards. On paper, I think this fixes most of the problems I laid out, but this is just a theory, and I know it's full of holes, and that's where I need you. I've already got a list of worries. The self-compel still requires a GM's approval, which could be a bottleneck. The passive trigger might overpay if a penalty applies to a very common role. Maybe it needs a once per scene cap. Tracking another resource might be too much bookkeeping for Savage Worlds' Fast, Furious, Fun motto, but I know that's just scratching the surface. I need you to help me break this. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to be my QA team. In the comments, tell me exactly how you would exploit this at your table. What's the obvious loophole I've completely missed? What rules does this conflict with? Don't be gentle. The goal here is to build something that makes hindrances feel like a rewarding, integral part of the game, not just a tax you pay at character creation. This engine is my first draft. I'll be reading every single comment, and hopefully in a future video, I'll showcase the most brilliant, game-breaking ways you all found to tear this thing apart. We'll look at the feedback, and maybe, just maybe, together we can build a stronger version. And until next time, stay savage.